She thought she was buying a forgotten building, a crumbling roadside museum left to time and dust. But when Elena Cross opened the garage doors on her first morning as owner, the silence broke with the glint of a hood ornament lost to history. Behind layers of cobwebs and secrecy sat a car whispered about in wartime lore, one said to vanish in the final weeks of 1945. What she found wasn't just rare metal. It was a secret so carefully buried, its truth could rewrite pages of the past and challenge everything she thought she knew about legacy, redemption, and truth. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if untold stories like this one stir something in you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode peels back a secret even darker than this one. The paperwork was thin. Just a scanned deed and a crumpled envelope from the county auction office, marked "Paid in Full." Elena Cross turned the envelope over in her hands, squinting at the faded ink like it might reveal something more. The museum she now owned wasn't much, just 3 cracked stone buildings off Highway 19 and a narrow driveway, overtaken by vines and soft gravel. Locals called it the Memorial Motor Hall, but no one had walked through its doors in over 2 decades. The lot had been posted for tax foreclosure so many times it became invisible. To Elena, though, it was possibility wrapped in rot. She hadn't bought it for the museum or for the memory. She bought it for the garage. She stepped from her truck as cicadas pulsed in the heat, the heavy southern air pressing against her shoulders like soaked denim. A crow flapped lazily from the roof, dislodging flakes of paint as it took flight. The main structure stood silent, a once grand facade with broken columns and windows glazed in grime. Beside it, the attached garage yawned 2 bay doors, one jammed open and rusted stiff, the other sealed shut with a thick chain padlocked and dangling like a challenge. She walked slowly toward the locked bay, boots crunching over glass and gravel. The lock was old German lettering etched into the steel. Strange, she traced it with her glove, then reached into her back pocket for the key ring the auction office had given her. Most of the keys were unmarked, collected over decades by the former owner, a reclusive man named Tobias Meller, who had died with no family and no will. Elena didn't care much about him. What mattered was what he left behind. The 5th key clicked. The chain groaned like a reluctant witness as it unraveled. She hesitated. Not because she was scared, but because in her gut, something told her this wasn't just a garage. It felt like a sealed vault, a capsule of forgotten time. She pushed the bay door up. It stuck halfway, protesting every inch. Dust cascaded from the top as light spilled in, cutting the darkness like a blade. Inside, the air was still, old. It smelled like leather and motor oil and maybe something deeper, something stale with time. The first thing she saw was the grille, tall, wide, and unmistakably German. A Mercedes emblem sat upright, dull with age but still proud, casting a circular shadow on the hood. She stepped forward, slow, careful. The body was long, armored, black, but dulled into a matte haze. The tires were flat, the windshield cracked. But the car, it wasn't a relic. It was a statement. She circled it, every inch drawing her deeper into something she didn't yet understand. It looked like it had been driven straight from a different century and hidden away on purpose. There were no tags, no dust prints, no signs of recent life. Only one message lingered beneath the silence. This car wasn't abandoned. It was buried. Elena didn't sleep that night. She tried. God, she tried. But every time her eyes shut, they opened again with the image of that silver Mercedes emblem burned behind her lids like a sunspot. She lay on the air mattress she'd inflated in what used to be the museum's dusty front office, listening to the moan of old pipes and the distant hum of crickets. The car wasn't just rare, it was wrong. It didn't belong there, not in a forgotten Georgia roadside museum with a leaky roof and a sagging porch. It belonged in Europe, behind velvet ropes, under spotlights, or more likely, in the pages of a war-era ghost story. And yet there it sat, buried beneath decades of silence, in a garage locked with a German padlock that had no business being on American soil. By sunrise, she was back in the garage, a thermos of black coffee shaking slightly in her hand. The morning light was stronger now, cutting through the haze like theater spotlights, drawing sharp lines across the car's weathered curves. She hadn't touched it yet. Something about it demanded permission. Reverence. She wasn't religious, but she felt like she was standing in a cathedral built not of stone but of steel, dust, and secrets. The badge on the grille read, Mercedes-Benz, 770 kelvins. She'd only heard the name once, in a documentary about World War II command vehicles. The grocer, Hitler's parade car, few were made. Fewer survived. Fewer still remained unaccounted for. The last one rumored missing had vanished from a convoy in Bavaria in the spring of 1945, weeks before the war ended. Some said it was captured. Others claimed it was destroyed. A few believed it was smuggled out loaded with gold, documents, or worse. She ran her hand along the front fender. The dust gave way beneath her fingers, exposing the original black paint beneath, dulled, but not decayed. The chrome trim still held its shape, hugging the wheel wells like skeletal jewelry. But it was the rearview mirror that caught her breath. It was angled upward, not at the road, but at the sky, as if the last person who sat inside had been looking not forward, but up and away. She opened the driver's door. It creaked, resistant, then gave. The interior was eerily preserved. Leather torn in places, but the seats still intact. A half-burned cigarette rested in the ashtray, untouched by time. The dashboard held dials marked in German. The speedometer topped out at 140. A faint scent lingered: oil, tobacco, and something faintly floral. Elena reached into the glove box and found only one item, a thin leather-bound book. She opened it slowly. Inside were handwritten entries, careful and dated, all from 1944 and 1945. Pages and pages of names, places, notes in a script she couldn't fully read. On the last page, a single line stood out, underlined in blue ink. Do not return until it's safe. J.C. She froze. Those were her grandfather's initials. Elena sat in the driver's seat longer than she meant to, the leather groaning beneath her weight like an old man stirred from sleep. The book trembled in her lap. Not from any draft, there wasn't one in that sealed garage, but from something deeper. Shock, maybe. Fear. Awe. Her fingers hovered over the initials again. J. C. Her grandfather's name was John Cross. She barely knew him. He died before she was born, a name only whispered in guilt-laced family stories. But he had been a mechanic in the army. That much she knew. A quiet man, who never came back quite whole. She looked around the cabin like it could offer answers. The steering wheel was massive, nearly vertical. The gear shift was long, topped with a worn Bakelite knob. On the passenger floor lay an old leather driving glove, curled and stiff with age. This was no museum prop. It was authentic, untouched, hidden. She popped the hood next, hands steady now with purpose. The latch creaked open, and she braced herself, half expecting a nest of rats or a cloud of rust to greet her. But what she found was something entirely different. The engine was pristine. Dusty, yes, but intact. A massive straight 8, clearly overbuilt, with original German serial numbers still legible along the block. The kind of engineering built not for longevity, but dominance, war-era precision. Elena had rebuilt dozens of engines in her time, from Chevys to Dodges to the occasional Jaguar, but this was something sacred, or cursed. She leaned in closer, and noticed a faint etching scratched into the inside of the hood, barely visible. She ran her fingers across it to trace the letters. Fürchte die Stille, fear the silence. Her heart skipped. She stepped back, suddenly chilled despite the heat. It wasn't just the odd message. It was the thought that someone had etched it by hand deliberately, perhaps in desperation. She didn't believe in ghosts. But she did believe in intent. And this car, it had intent written all over it. Back in the museum office, she dusted off her laptop and began searching for any records of a missing 770 Kelvins. There were only a few. One registered to Hermann Goering, seized by Allied forces. Another reportedly owned by Heinrich Himmler, destroyed during retreat. But one, the most elusive, was supposedly used by Adolf Hitler himself during his final months in Berlin. That car had vanished with an armored convoy while fleeing south through Bavaria in April 1945. Elena stared at the screen. The car's license plate in the old photos matched the imprint still faintly visible on the back bumper of the one in her garage. It was the same car. She sat back in her chair, breath shallow. If this was true, if the car really was what she thought it was then, it wasn't just rare. It was untraceable, unclaimed, lost to history for a reason. And now, somehow, it belonged to her. The second time she opened the glove box, Elena was more careful. The brittle leather journal still sat where she'd left it, its spine cracked from years of slumber. But tucked beneath it, nearly invisible against the aged velvet lining, was something she'd missed. A photograph. Small, curled at the edges, black and white. She held it to the light. It showed a young American soldier, tall, square-shouldered, wearing grease-stained fatigues, standing beside the very same Mercedes. His hand rested casually on the hood, half smiling like he knew exactly what he was doing, but wasn't ready to explain it. Behind him, the alpine foothills rose like ghosts, snow still frosting the peaks. Someone had scribbled something on the back in pencil, now smudged but still legible. J. Cross, April 1945, near Salzburg. Her stomach knotted. It wasn't just her grandfather's name now. It was a timestamp, a location, a confirmation. This wasn't coincidence. The man in the photo, barely older than she was now, was real. And he had stood beside the same car, nearly 80 years earlier, on a different continent, during a different world. She sat down hard on an old crate, the photo balanced on her knee, and stared at the Mercedes through the open garage door. The sunlight had shifted, slicing across the hood and illuminating the chrome badge like a spotlight on a stage actor awaiting his next cue. And Elena, suddenly, was part of the scene, inheritor of something she didn't ask for but couldn't turn away from. She grabbed her phone and called the only person who might know the missing pieces. Her mother answered on the third ring, voice already wary. "Elena, everything okay?" "You never told me Grandpa was in Austria during the war," Elena said, skipping pleasantries. There was silence on the line. Then a slow inhale. "Where did you hear that?" "I didn't." "I found a photo," Elena replied. "Of him, next to a car, a very specific car, in Salzburg, April 1945. Another silence. This one longer. When her mother finally spoke, her voice had dropped into something more tired than afraid. "He didn't talk about the war. Not ever. He came back. Different. Always quiet. Always watching the road like it was going to come alive again. Your grandmother said he left something behind over there. Something he couldn't talk about. Was it a car? I don't know," her mother whispered. "Maybe. All I know is, every year on the same date, he'd drive out alone into the woods and sit in his truck for hours. He never let anyone come. Never said where he went." Elena looked again at the photo, the worn face, the sharp jawline, the eyes that looked far older than their age. "Mom," she said softly, "I think I found what he left behind." There was nothing on the line but breath, and in the background of that silence, the car waited, as if it had always been waiting for someone to finish what had begun. Elena sat on the back porch of the museum that night, the photograph cradled in one hand, the leather journal in the other. The stars overhead were faint, washed by the distant glow of town, but a few clung to the dark like stubborn memories. She didn't feel like the girl who bought a museum anymore. She felt like an interloper in her own life, Someone who'd stumbled into a story already written in another time, in a language made of silence and sacrifice. She'd never really known her grandfather. John Cross died when she was a baby. Her mother barely spoke of him, only ever referring to his quiet spells and the war years as though they were a fog too thick to drive through. There were no framed photos of him in the house growing up, no medals on the wall, just a tool chest in the garage with a nameplate so worn you had to squint to read it. He was a mystery wrapped in motor oil. Now, he was more than that. She flipped open the journal again. The entries weren't long, but they were methodical military dates, repair notes, convoy numbers. All written in neat cursive, with occasional German annotations in red pencil. She cross-referenced one of the locations listed Berchtesgaden, a known Nazi retreat. She traced the dates leading up to April 1945. That's when the entries stopped. Abruptly. No farewell. Just a final line in English. Vehicle secured. Awaiting final orders. Elena's fingers tightened around the edge of the page. What final orders? And from who? She closed the book, stood up, and paced the length of the porch. Somewhere beneath her boots, the land held secrets. She could feel them, buried just beneath the surface, humming like tension before a storm. The next morning, she drove to her mother's house, a modest cottage on the edge of town where the grass was always just slightly too long and the mailbox leaned a little too far left. Her mother opened the door in a robe and wary eyes. "You brought it?" she asked, her voice softer than the day before. Elena handed her the photo. Her mother looked at it for a long time without speaking, then sank into the porch chair like her knees had forgotten their job. "I remember that look," she whispered. "It's the same one he had when he came back. Like he'd seen something beautiful and terrible and couldn't say which one it was." "Oh, did he ever mention a car?" "No, just that he had to leave something behind. Said it was better that way. Said some engines weren't meant to run again." Elena sat beside her. "Why did he never talk about it?" Her mother shook her head. "Because whatever he saw, whatever he did, it didn't come home clean." They sat there in the slow quiet of morning, two women separated by time but bound by blood. And in the stillness between them, Elena began to understand she hadn't just inherited a car, she'd inherited a burden. The photo went viral overnight. Elena hadn't meant for it to. She'd only uploaded one shot to a vintage restoration forum, a single-angled image of the Mercedes with the caption, "Found in an old Georgia museum. Need help identifying." Within hours, the comments exploded. Historians, collectors, conspiracy theorists. A man from Oslo claimed it was a reproduction. Another from Berlin swore it was real. A collector in Texas offered $1 million on the spot. Sight unseen. But it was the private message that changed everything. Subject line: "Do not sell. I'm flying in." The message was short, formal, signed only. Matthias Reiner, Institute of War History, Munich. She ignored it at first. But 2 days later, he was standing at the edge of her gravel lot, in a gray wool coat and polished boots, suitcase in one hand, leather binder in the other. "Elena Cross?" he asked, voice clipped with a faint German accent. She nodded, wary. "And you're?" "Reiner. You received my message." She studied him. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Eyes sharp behind thin-framed glasses. No smile. No small talk. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped past her toward the garage like he already knew the way. Inside, he paused. Just for a moment. Then he exhaled, like someone seeing a ghost in full daylight. "My God," he whispered. "It's real." Elena leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "What do you mean, real?" Reiner opened his binder and slid out several yellowed documents typed manifests, wartime photographs, even a transport schedule stamped with the Nazi eagle. "This car was part of the final convoy out of Berlin," he said. "April 1945. Destination, Bavaria. Hitler never rode in it himself. He was already entombed in his bunker. But this," he gestured to the vehicle, "was part of what they were trying to protect. A mobile archive, possibly even carrying stolen documents or gold. I didn't find anything like that, Elena said. Just a book, a photo. Reiner nodded slowly. If your grandfather was the man in the photo, then he may have intercepted the convoy. There are records of Allied mechanics reassigned to field seizure units, teams meant to catalog and secure enemy equipment. But some never reported back. You think he stole it? Elena asked. I think, Reiner said, his voice tightening. He saved it from disappearing into the black market. The war was ending. Lines were chaotic. Orders blurred. Many soldiers made decisions we'll never fully understand. He circled the Mercedes, running his gloved hand over the dull chrome. You have no idea what this is worth. I'm starting to know, he said, looking her dead in the eyes. Not just in money, in history. If this car proves what I believe, it's not just valuable, it's dangerous. There are people who do not want it found. Elena felt the chill settle again in her bones. It was no longer about restoration. It was about responsibility. That night, Elena didn't touch the car. She didn't open the garage. She didn't even step outside. The museum, once just a quiet escape with good bones and broken dreams, now felt like a pressure cooker. Every creak in the floorboards, every rustle in the trees outside seemed heavier, loaded. Reiner had returned to his hotel, promising discretion, but he left a copy of the war documents behind, and a warning, decide carefully what story you want this car to tell. Once it's public, you can't untell it. She spread the papers across the floor like puzzle pieces. German, English, stamps from military depots, movement logs. One caught her eye, a requisition form signed by an Allied officer in 1945, authorizing the transport of high-value Axis assets for temporary holding. The bottom corner was smudged, but the typed name was clear. Sergeant John Cross. Her grandfather, her blood. He hadn't stolen the car. He'd been ordered to move it, but it never arrived. Elena sat back, her head swimming. She thought of the journal in the glove box, the photo, the scratched warning under the hood, Fürchte die Stille. Fear the silence. Was he warning her? Or someone else? She thought of her mother, sitting on the porch, speaking about a man who never told his story. Maybe it wasn't guilt that kept him quiet. Maybe it was the weight of knowing too much, and now that weight had passed to her. She spent the next morning on the phone with a lawyer, then another, then a museum curator in D.C. Most couldn't believe what she was saying. One laughed outright. Another said if it was true, she should contact the State Department. But she didn't. Not yet. She needed space to think. Truth moved fast when you let it go, and once it did, it never slowed down again. Later that afternoon, a stranger parked outside the gates. Elena stepped out before they could reach the porch. I'm not giving interviews, she said flatly. The man raised his hands. Not a reporter, just someone who heard. Rumors. He was in his 40s, sun-scarred and clean, with the kind of voice that made you instinctively check your back pocket. You don't have to keep it, he said, leaning against his car. You can sell it. Private collectors overseas would pay more than any museum. You wouldn't have to explain anything. Just one wire transfer. One handshake. Elena stared at him. And never sleep again? He grinned, as if that question said more than her answer. That night, Elena unlocked the garage again. She stood in front of the Mercedes as the sun bled into the trees. The light hit the paint, and for a second, it almost looked new. She reached for the hood ornament, brushing the dust gently from its crown. She had a choice. Money, fame, silence, or truth. And her gut told her what her grandfather had chosen all those years ago when he vanished into history with a stolen war machine. He didn't hide it out of shame. He hid it out of duty. The next morning, Elena returned to the Mercedes not as a mechanic, not as a granddaughter, but as someone ready to pull back the last curtain. She brought a flashlight, gloves, and a feeling in her gut she couldn't quite name. Part fear, part reverence. The journal had nagged at her all night. Those last few entries, the sudden stop in April 1945, the vague warning etched under the hood, it all pointed to something unfinished. She opened the rear door of the Mercedes and knelt on the floor. The leather creaked like it had been waiting. Her hands felt along the seams of the seat cushions, searching for anything loose or irregular. Nothing. But when she pushed her weight against the seat back, there was a faint click. Her breath caught. She pressed again, more firmly this time, and the seat shifted slightly. A panel at the base popped loose so seamlessly integrated, it would have been invisible to anyone not looking for it. Behind it, nestled into a shallow cavity, was a sealed canvas pouch. Dust caked its surface, but the zipper moved cleanly. Inside were 3 items. First, a pair of rusted U.S. Army dog tags. Cross, J. Sergeant 512th, Ordnance Battalion. O. Catholic. Her hands trembled. Second, a small envelope, yellowed and stiff, addressed in block letters to, "Whoever finds this, know the truth." She set the tags down beside her and opened the envelope. The letter inside was handwritten, the penmanship careful, almost formal. The 30th of April, 1945. I was ordered to retrieve a vehicle from a convoy retreating south of Salzburg. When I reached it, the Germans were gone, abandoned. Inside the car, I found not gold, not weapons, but papers, names, locations, orders. Some of it encoded, some of it not. I sent the documents up the chain. They said they'd handle it. I wasn't sure they would. This car was never meant to be seen again. And yet here I was, its final custodian. I could have handed it over. Maybe I should have. But something in me said, wait, not out of disobedience. Out of fear. Not for myself, but for the truth. And what it would cost. So I hid it. I sealed it away and told no one. I lived with that silence. Let it turn to rust in my heart. I don't know if I was right. But if you're reading this, it means time has caught up. And you have a choice. Finish what I couldn't. Tell the story. Not for me. For all the ones who never got to speak. J. Cross. Elena wiped her eyes without realizing. The words blurred, then cleared again. The third item in the pouch was a small brass key, labeled Vienna Safe Deposit, Box 112. She turned it over in her palm, the metal warm from her grip. Whatever her grandfather had held back. He hadn't destroyed it. He'd buried it in layers, and one final layer still waited. Vienna greeted her with overcast skies, and the kind of cold that seeped into your bones despite the spring calendar. Elena hadn't planned to leave the country, let alone chase down a trail over 70 years cold. But the key burned in her pocket like a live wire. She could have mailed it, could have called ahead, but that felt wrong, like breaking a promise her grandfather had buried beneath the seat of a haunted car. The bank was old-world elegant, carved stone and polished brass, its lobby hushed like a cathedral. She stepped up to the counter, flashed her passport, and slid the brass key forward with a whisper of metal. The attendant, a woman in her 60s with white gloves and a voice like velvet, blinked at the key. Her brows lifted. "One moment," she said, disappearing into the back. Elena waited, pulse thudding. She scanned the marble floor, the gilt molding, the chandelier that trembled slightly above her head. Everything felt too quiet, like history itself was holding its breath. Minutes passed. Then the woman returned and beckoned Elena into a narrow hallway, down a flight of stairs, and into a room filled with small iron boxes. At the end, she stopped. "Box 112, she said softly. "This has not been opened since 1946. Elena's hand hovered. The key slid in easily, turned with a soft click. Inside, the box held only 2 things, a stack of folded documents, and a photo yellowed, creased, its edges beginning to flake. She lifted the photo first. It showed a group of men in uniform, American, British, and Soviet officers, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of what looked like a burning building. Their faces were tight, grim. One of them was unmistakably her grandfather. Behind him, in the shadows, was the Mercedes, barely visible. No one looked at it, but it was there, tucked behind the moment, like a secret refusing to be erased. She turned to the documents. Folders marked with stamps from Allied intelligence divisions. Reports, witness transcripts. Some redacted. But one name appeared again and again in the margins. Project Morgenlicht, Morning Light. It wasn't just a vehicle manifest. These were records from early Nazi defection negotiations. Files on hidden transfers. Testimonies from captured officers. One phrase echoed in several documents. The car must not reach Berlin. And now, she understood why. It wasn't the car itself. It was what it carried. The Mercedes had been a decoy, a trap, a moving archive. Evidence of escape routes, foreign sympathizers, secret cargo lists that could have changed the war's final narrative. Someone, somewhere, wanted it erased. But her grandfather didn't comply. He didn't just steal a car. He preserved a truth too dangerous for his time. Elena sat in the quiet of that stone room, the documents spread before her, the air thick with memory. He hadn't buried guilt. He had buried proof. And now, with trembling hands and a heart pounding not in fear but in clarity, she knew what she had to do. The press conference was small by modern standards. No podium, no breaking news banners, no media circus. Just a simple folding table in front of the museum, a few rows of metal chairs, and a black cloth draped over something unmistakably long, unmistakably curved, the Mercedes. Elena stood behind the table, her hair pulled back, grease under her fingernails, and a weight in her chest that felt both centuries old and freshly born. She didn't prepare a speech, didn't need to. The story had already been told by metal, by silence, by the quiet defiance of a man who refused to let history be rewritten with a lie. She looked at the reporters, local papers, a few historians, a quiet delegate from the U.S. Embassy, and one wide-eyed student from the University of Vienna who'd flown in on her own dime just to be here. Then she spoke. "My name is Elena Cross. I'm a mechanic. I bought this place to fix up old cars, maybe run a small garage. I didn't expect to find a piece of history. I didn't expect it to find me." She paused, unfolding a single sheet of paper, her grandfather's letter. "This vehicle," she said, motioning behind her, "was hidden in 1945 by Sergeant John Cross, my grandfather. It was part of the final Nazi convoy fleeing Berlin. But it wasn't just a car. It was a container of documents, of secrets, of things some people never wanted the world to see." She held up the brass key. "He didn't run from that truth. He protected it, quietly, for a lifetime. And now, I'm here to finish what he started." She stepped to the side and pulled back the black cloth. The car shimmered in the sunday, not restored, not repainted, preserved. Its scars still showed the cracked windshield, the faded trim, the dent along the rear fender that hadn't been smoothed. She left it all. Let the truth show. "I'm donating the vehicle and all associated documents to the National World War II Museum," she said, her voice steady. "On one condition, that my grandfather's letter is displayed with it. He was a quiet man, but he believed that some stories, even painful ones, deserved to be heard." The applause didn't erupt. It unfolded, like something sacred, gentle, sustained. And behind the clapping, she saw her mother standing beside Reiner, both with tears in their eyes. Neither said anything. They didn't have to. Later that evening, after everyone had left, Elena sat in the driver's seat of the Mercedes one last time. The key was in the ignition, but she didn't turn it. She rested her hand on the steering wheel, then looked into the rearview mirror. In the reflection, she didn't just see herself. She saw a line stretching back of choices, of burdens, of truths carried in silence. And now, finally, spoken aloud. She smiled softly and whispered, "We did it." And for the first time since that iron garage door lifted, she felt light,